The rain had turned the highway into a mirror of gray when everything fell apart for Matthew Collins, and he did not yet know it would also be the moment his life quietly began again. He was kneeling on the cold asphalt beside a black sedan pulled awkwardly onto the shoulder, his work boots soaked, his hands trembling as he tried to steady a stranger whose breathing came in shallow waves. Her dress clung to her with rain, her face pale with pain and fear, one hand protectively curved around her pregnant belly. Cars passed by without slowing, splashing water, the world rushing forward while Matthew's own life paused in that fragile space between responsibility and compassion. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel if you believe kindness still matters, if you believe second chances can change lives, and if you believe that doing the right thing is never wasted, even when it costs you everything. Matthew was a single father living in Ohio, the kind of man who measured time not by hours but by school pickups, grocery receipts, and the small breaths of his 6-year-old son, Caleb, sleeping in the next room. Since his wife passed away 3 years earlier from a sudden illness, Matthew had learned to carry the weight of 2 roles on one exhausted spine. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a mid-sized corporate office in Columbus, a job that barely covered rent, daycare, and the quiet emergencies of life. Every morning he woke before dawn, packed lunches, tied shoes, and promised his son that everything would be okay, even when he himself was not sure how. That morning, the rain had already delayed traffic, and Matthew was watching the clock anxiously when he noticed the stopped car ahead and the woman standing beside it, clearly struggling. He told himself he should keep going. He was already cutting it close. His boss had warned him twice this month about punctuality, and being late again could mean termination. But then he saw her bend forward slightly, one hand gripping the car door, the other pressed to her stomach, and something deeper than fear moved him. He pulled over without thinking, as if instinct itself had taken the wheel. By the time emergency services arrived, Matthew was soaked, shaking, and nearly an hour late for work. He had stayed because the woman was alone, because the contractions had started, because no one else stopped. When the ambulance finally drove away with her safely inside, she looked at him with an expression he could not name, something like gratitude mixed with exhaustion, something unfinished. Matthew never learned her name. He only watched the taillights disappear into the rain and felt the heavy pull of consequences settle in his chest. When Matthew arrived at work, his shoes left wet prints on the tile floor, his shirt clung uncomfortably, and his heart pounded harder than it had on the highway. He was called into the office before he could even sit down. The explanation did not matter. His manager barely looked at him, citing policy, punctuality, and reliability. The words blurred together. Fired, effective immediately, security would walk him out. Just like that, years of effort dissolved into a cardboard box and a final glance at a building that had never felt like home anyway. That night, Matthew sat at his small kitchen table, bills spread out like quiet accusations. Caleb slept in the next room, clutching a worn stuffed bear. Matthew stared at the wall and wondered how many right decisions it took to erase one wrong one, or if life simply did not keep that kind of score. He felt anger, then shame for feeling it, then fear so sharp it made his chest ache. He had helped someone in need, and now he was unemployed. A single father standing on the edge of uncertainty with no safety net beneath him. Days passed in a blur of job applications, polite rejections, and mounting pressure. Matthew sold his old watch, skipped meals, and smiled through bedtime stories so his son would not see the cracks forming behind his eyes. He questioned himself in the quiet moments, replaying the rain, the road, the choice. He wondered if kindness was a luxury he could no longer afford. A week later, everything changed again, just as suddenly as it had fallen apart. Matthew received a call asking him to come to the same office building he had been escorted out of days earlier. No explanation was given. He almost did not go, assuming it was a mistake or a cruel reminder. But something urged him forward, the same quiet force that had pulled him over on the highway. When he arrived, he was led not to his old department, but to the executive floor, a place he had never been before. The room was filled with glass, light, and an unsettling calm. That was where he saw her, the pregnant woman from the roadside, now seated comfortably, dressed elegantly, her posture confident, her eyes unmistakable. She was no longer fragile and stranded. She was composed, powerful, and unmistakably in control. Her name was Rebecca Harrington, and she was the majority owner of the entire company. Matthew stood frozen as realization washed over him. This woman, whom he had knelt beside in the rain, whom he had helped without knowing anything about her life, was the one who signed the paychecks, who set the policies, who ultimately decided who stayed and who was dismissed. The irony was almost too heavy to carry. Rebecca had gone into early labor that day due to complications, and Matthew's decision to stay had likely prevented a far worse outcome. She had asked questions later, quietly, about the man who helped her, about where he worked, about what happened when he arrived late. When she learned he had been fired, something in her shifted. She did not see a policy violation. She saw a man who chose humanity over convenience. What followed was not just reinstatement. Rebecca ordered an internal review of company culture, leadership accountability, and flexibility for working parents. Matthew was not only rehired but promoted into a role that offered stability, better pay, and flexible hours. The company implemented emergency leave protocols, ensuring no employee would ever be punished for helping someone in need again. But more than the professional redemption, what changed Matthew most was something quieter. Rebecca personally ensured that Caleb's education fund was supported, not as charity, but as recognition of a family that had already given enough. She made it clear that Matthew's kindness had not gone unnoticed, not by her and not by the world. Months later, Matthew stood watching his son play in the yard, laughter floating into the evening air. The fear that once lived constantly in his chest had softened. Life was still hard, still unpredictable, but it felt lighter now, as if the universe had gently reminded him that goodness echoes, even when the sound takes time to return. If this story is touching your heart right now, if you believe moments of compassion still matter in a world that often rushes past them, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach those who need them most. And before this story ends, we have a special request for you. Please comment below with the word kindness if you believe one good choice can change a life, even when it comes at a cost. Matthew never became rich or famous. He remained a simple man, a devoted father, a reminder walking quietly among others that character is revealed not when it is convenient, but when it is costly. And somewhere in Ohio, on a stretch of rain-soaked road, a single decision continued to ripple outward, proving that sometimes the very thing that breaks us open is the same thing that lets the light finally in.